So you're correct. I mean, what I've referred to this, and we've talked to director staff, we've talked with our statewide, migratory bird folks for a number of months now, and we're under the experimental criteria. In other words, we're limited
right.
By what we requested, but it doesn't count towards the experiment. So we're offered a season. In other words, if we shot 6 whooping cranes this year, it wouldn't count against us. We aren't going to do that. We haven't done that. We don't have, there's no, it was a dangerous thing to say, but really, the criteria that we have are experimental because we haven't shown the feds that we passed the experiment yet. That report, I'll write that report
because of
up
the timing.
Because of the timing. When we would have had to ask, we wouldn't have done that.
Got it. This makes perfect sense to me, and I really appreciate your approach to this fall's conversation of maximum flexibility so that we can have a conversation. Is there anything that you need in terms of guidance from us, or do you have the full authority to pursue maximum flexibility so we can have that conversation?
From the Mississippi Flyway Council perspective, we'll be pursuing the maximum, and it's kind of a minimum ask. We're going to give the calculations. We're going to say Tennessee wants a 60-day season statewide at this number, and we'll get a yes. It's a matter of when we get a yes in the process. So there's no need for you folks to weigh in on that. After that, we'll have a conversation in detail about those parameters that you discussed. There will be federal sideboards, but they'll be fairly minimal.
Great. Thank you very much. And by the way, I have a much deeper appreciation of all that has to go into all of these different seasons being set and the data that you all use, much more so than when I did several years ago before I served on the commission. I appreciate the work. And Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the digression. I just wanted to understand better. Thank you.
Well, let me zip through these slides. If y'all get dizzy, just close your eyes. I'm going to go back, try to get back where I was. Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't zip too fast, okay?
Okay.
Two brief questions, and I'll have to say I applaud what the feds have done to allow us to make these considerations now. It allows families to plan their vacations well in advance of when they've been able to do that before. And the extra experimental season, I think, is one of those unintended consequences, and I wish you'd gotten a better response, but thank you for doing what you did there. Two questions. Would you back up to where you showed, I believe, beginning in 2012, the count, 13, 14, there. I'm just interested in maybe between now and the next meeting, I'm seeing a very steady increase all the way through 2015, and then all of a sudden we have a dip in the count for January 2016. We go from 42,000 to 16,000 and change. Something doesn't feel right there, and there's probably, and maybe it's just one thing I have heard in East Tennessee is that our season has been successful, and that is that the birds are being spread out more. I'm hearing more birds on Watts Bar, Tellico, Loudon, and so maybe that's a part of this anomaly. Is there any information you can share on that?
Certainly, and I would propose that this is the main reason is the warm winter that we had.
Okay, sure.
So these birds, just like mallards,
Great
if you're a
point.
duck hunter, you know that mallards don't come down sort of till later, until it gets to a certain cold threshold, if you will. That's really what happened with these birds. Again, look at the total EP population count of 94,000. That increased from last year by 10, 11,000 birds. So there are more cranes around. They just weren't in Tennessee in this first week of January.
I think I resembled that factor as far as birds getting down here because of the warm weather. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. The second question is, just as the commission was surprised that we were not going forward out of the experimental season, I think the public was expecting to, now's the time for comments and all, and in fact, we're staying the course for this next year. That being said, when will you be accepting comments from the public for the next season? And you're about to go there, and I've just set the stage.
Right.
Okay.
Can we just
Thank
hold
you,
that?
sir. My apology.
Any other questions before I move on?
Yeah.
Nope.
I stood in line for 3 years, and I was fortunate to get a permit each of the 3 years, and I was fortunate to harvest my 3 birds each of the 3 years. My question is, why do we start the season so early and end it on December 31st. This year, I know there was flooding and the birds were spread out a lot because they couldn't rest on the sandbars in the river around the Blythes Ferry Refuge. It would seem to make more sense to run the season more into January. My second comment is I had lunch with Ben and Diana Layton after our hunt this year, and they were talking about when we go to a statewide draw, their biggest fear is there'll be people who'll say, well, I'll just put in for that hunt and then never have a place to go and the permit goes to waste. So how do you address those two questions?
Good questions. And Ben and the folks in Region 3 and I have wrestled over a lot of these issues, lots of different ideas for a long time, but several years now, in preparation for our discussions about the operational season. We had a meeting in December with people from all across the state, the migratory bird folks and the regional wildlife program managers, to talk about sort of options that we wanted. So to address your two questions, the timing of the season, I was not here when you folks set that first season. One of the things about hunter behavior, we know whether it's dove hunting, duck hunting, and probably even deer hunting, and likely crane hunting, is when the season opens, folks are excited. They've got anxiety building up to that season. They're excited. And then as the season goes on, they kind of lose interest. So you're correct. In a warm year like this, a later season would probably have increased the harvest. I'll show you harvest numbers. That's going to be my next slide. And the harvest was down this year because of that warming trend. So it's certainly an option. You know, this hasn't been decided for sure yet, and obviously we'll bring recommendations to you next year at the right times. But one of the discussions in our sort of a statewide meeting to discuss cranes last December was, you know, putting the season at the very end. And obviously, you know, we'll take the full 60 days if we can, but we want to put it at the end. So again, with this year being kind of we want to keep things the same for the experimental as we had during the experiment, we decided not to make that change to move that. The other question about, I'm forgetting.
About the drawing. My question about the drawing was, when we were talking with Ben and Diana, was how do you prevent, I mean, there's only certain areas where you're going to be able to hunt these birds. How do you prevent somebody from just saying, well, I think I'll put in on that and,
right,
and you know, get drawn? Right now, you have to physically get up early in the morning, go to a high school in Birchwood, put your name in, stand in line, wait around till noon, and then see if you're drawn. For the past 3 years, there's been exactly the exact number of people. I think it's 400 who applied and got permits. I mean, right to the letter.
So there's a lot of options, and that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. I'll just remind folks, and the new commissioners will appreciate this information. The crane hunting in the current crane zone is primarily on private land. One of the reasons we have the season is because of agricultural damage. And so these farmers are looking to get birds, you know, dispersed off of their property. And so a lot of the folks that live near there that have been able to get these permits for 1 or more years have built these relationships with these farmers. It seems to be working. I've not received any complaints from farmers in my time here in Tennessee that about cranes. And so I think it's working to some extent to alleviate the pressure that these farmers have on their crops. There's a lot of options of how do we can structure the season. We can structure zones. We can structure the number of permits that we issue by zone. Again, enter into discussions about those options. And we've got a bunch of different options on the table. I'd be glad to chat with you later. I don't remember what they all are in my mind, but Ben has some ideas. You're right. We want to maintain, one of our goals, I think, would be to maintain harvest pressure in that current zone. And how we do that is, you know, there's a lot of options there. I don't have a real good answer for that, but it's keenly on our plate. It's one of the top things on our plate. How do we retain pressure on those birds, on those agricultural fields that was some of the impetus for the season, and make it fair to people? So that's going to be an ongoing discussion that we have, and I'll be glad to chat with you about those ideas.
One final comment. I know this year we didn't even attempt to hunt until between Christmas and New Year's because the birds weren't there.
And that's reflected in the population count, right, exactly.
Thank you.
Joe, when we established the experimental season, the federal government had given us, I believe, 60 days and 750 permits that we could, for the experimental season. Is that still available, or are we limited by what we chose to do for the experimental season?
Tennessee wrote a hunt plan. It's called the Tennessee Hunt Plan. It's in the MOU. I've got it right in front of me. What we said, and again, this was kind of like we're going to ask next year. This was the maximum we thought we would do, and the commission decided. Again, I wasn't here. Some of you folks were here. Decided to sort of compromise, I guess, on that. So let me find this and just read it directly to you. So what we asked for was a 58-day season with a closure around the Crane Festival. So that's in the hunt plan. That's the maximum we could do this year. We requested 2199 permits. We will issue 733 permits valid for 3 cranes each, totaling 2199. And then there's some other details in there. But that, and then we have a closed zone and we have a hunt zone. And so we could, you folks could increase the number of permits and increase the season length. What we thought was going to the commissioner's comment about sort of retaining some hunting pressure in the zone. We thought one option would be to retain the current number in that zone and issue the new permits that we could statewide. We can't do that this year. If we issue all of them this year in the zone, next year we'd be sort of taking them away from the zone if that's where we went and distributing them across the state. So there's options out there for this year if you folks wanted to. Again, a 58-day season with a closure, 2-day closure around the Crane Festival, as mandated by what we requested, and then a few more permits.
So that's open to us now.
It is.
Could we go statewide now?
We cannot go statewide.
But we could increase the number to 733, and we could have a full 60-day, less 2 days around the Crane Festival now.
Technically, we could have a
58-day, whatever. We could have 60.
56-day, because if we have a split in waterfowl season. Well, we could. I guess we could, if we started on a Thursday.
If we don't split it, we could have 60 days.
Yes, but the first 2 days of that season would be a Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
And waterfowl season will be closed.
Okay.
So that may be something. So one of the considerations that we made, and we talked about this, the regional wildlife program managers, the regional waterfowl people, myself, the director staff, for simplicity's sake, for the hunters, we thought another year of experimental, kind of the same way as it was, and then we make all the changes kind of at one time, because there's a lot more options we can do. The closing time at 3 p.m., we could discuss that, going statewide, increasing the number of permits. We could change the number of permits that we issue. In other words, right now we have to issue them in packs of 3. That would not be a criteria under the operational season. So we could issue them packs of 1, packs of 2. In other words, you could spread out. Do you want to maximize opportunity to people? There's different options
But
out
you're
there.
talking about the operational season. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about because the feds changed the rules and we weren't able to take advantage of it, we chose to go less than what they offered.
Right.
So the experimental season right now is more limited than it could be.
Correct.
According to the feds, all we need to do is okay 733 permits and whatever dates we would like to do.
That's correct.
Under the federal rules. We're limiting ourselves.
Right. Right.
So the answer is we can go with more permits and we can go with more days, not statewide, if we choose to do that now. And I think that's something the hunters expected, whether the feds change it and we didn't do it or whatever. I suggest that that might be a consideration to Mr. Chairman to consider.
Was just going to comment on Commissioner Swan's about the date. I mean, when we set that date, we done it out of respect for the crane season. That's why we cut it off at that early date, and it was just a compromise that we made. So, and it was just out of respect for the crane season and the people. But I'm with Joe, the agricultural people in that area. They're very pleased with the season, and I want to keep that core pressure in that area to keep off of the farmers. I mean, a flock of cranes comes in and decimates a wheat field. So And it's, so far from what information I've got, it's been successful. So I'd like to keep our core area, and then whatever, you know, we can expand, so. Thank you.
Sounds like we better cater the April meeting. It's gonna be a lengthy discussion on cranes. We would like to say, obviously, last time before we instituted this season, 3-year season, that's turned into a 4-year, I guess. It was very heated and there was a lot of concern, but I think it's gone as well as it possibly could have. And I'm very pleased that we've had the opportunity to hunt these birds. And I think, you know, going forward, as much opportunity within the federal guidelines that is allowed, I think, you know, when it's not obviously hurtful to the resource, which their guidelines are obviously very protective of the resource. I think we need to provide as much opportunity as we possibly can.
Okay, I've got a few more slides, but if I could ask, would you like me to present a different season structure for the April meeting, maximizing the allowable permits under the Tennessee Hunt Plan, and also maximizing the number of days and hunting as late as we can? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think that should be, I don't know, I feel like that will be discussed, so we maybe should be prepared for just every scenario that's available to us.
Okay. Okay, let's see if we can find where we were. Okay, so this is the 2015-16 Sandhill Crane Harvest. We harvested 155 out of the 1,200 birds permitted. Again, the primary issue is that the weather was so warm until right there at the end of January that birds were not really in the area. We had 70% of surveyed hunters participate, and as you can see from the numbers, 516 hunts involving about over 2,000 hours of folks sort of chasing cranes out there. So again, it's a great hunting season. We're getting our folks outdoors and enjoying nature. So skipping on in your notebooks to the early migratory bird seasons, again, I'm just going to refer to these probably for this one last meeting as early and late. There were no changes in the federal frameworks. The species here are woodcock, snipe, crow, the early wood duck teal season, and September Canada goose seasons. This proclamation, which is 1410 in your book, uses generic language. And so the dates don't need to be changed, but I wanted to, well, here it is right here. So we've got generic dates. I apologize for the color change. It's probably hard on your eyes there. And here is the table that will appear in the hunting guide when it's published. The dates in white are the calendar dates for this year based on that generic proclamation. So, and you'll notice the teal-only experimental days, we've got those days listed. This is our 3rd year of that experiment. We're having some trouble getting our sample size. We may extend that again. I'm not sure where that will go, but those are the dates for the early migratory bird seasons. And the 3rd proclamation that relates to migratory bird hunting is the dove hunting regulations, and that also is in your packet. There's no changes for this as well this year. There are 2 changes we'd like to make during the regular or 90-day season table that's there in your packet. We noticed a correction we need to make for the calendar this year. I'll show you that in a minute. That's in segment 2 of the hunting season. And we also wanted to adjust the dates of segment 3 based on some public input we received. Folks wanted to hunt more days in December and then also hunt to the end of the framework in January. So we'll shift now to the Proclamation 1511 red line. And this will get you what we're talking about. So if you notice the second segment here, it used to say the second Saturday in October through the first Sunday in November. And last year that was correct. It gave us these 23 days. So these 28, 23, and 31, that's a total of 90 days, which is what we're allowed in the regular season, which is what we'll have this year. The problem is that this year we would have had a 31-day season in this segment here. So we corrected the dates. Again, these are generic language proclamations, so we don't have to open them up every year. And in this case, we just corrected it to say 22 days after the second Saturday in October. So there's no change in the season, but this date here would have given us 31 this year because of where that second Saturday fell. And then, then the 3rd segment, we're moving this about 13 days later. We're just basically shifting the entire 39 days to the end of the framework. And it retains all those days in December that folks want, and it allows us to hunt till the end of the federal framework.
I have a question. A couple of years ago, we had 2 groups that came that were as interested in dove hunting as anybody I've ever seen, but there was kind of a negotiated settlement on what those dates were to be. Did they have any input? Were they some of the group that you know of that asked for this change?
I believe one of them was is it Curzan? Okay, Cruzan. Mr. Cruzan was commented again this year. And I don't remember if did they want dates in December? Is that what their request was back
I
then?
don't remember what it was. I know that they had some different ideas, and they settled on it, and Chairman Bledsoe, I think, negotiated the settlement. But I just wonder if we're gonna inflame one side or the other if you start changing this based on one side's comments. Just a thought.
The beauty of this, and historically we've not done this for waterfowl, is have a preview meeting and then a final meeting. So Commissioner Bledsoe, if you'd like to chat with me about this, I don't know if you know, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you remember who they are, I'd be glad to reach out to them specifically, if that.
We'll have to go back and look.
Okay.
I remember it was an hour and a half discussion on dates on this. I mean,
Okay.
they wanted breaks in between to kind of get the population to settle back down, to come back in to feed it, so. Which I think traditionally, probably 90% of the people hunt opening weekend, or the opening two,
And then they're done.
die-hard dove hunters that hunt a year.
Right. What we can do is we'll go back and look at that commission meeting. We'll review that and adjust this accordingly. I just put the 70-day season up here in case folks had questions about the difference between 70 and 90-day seasons, but this has not changed from last year. And again, you'll notice the third segment here, it's essentially that what we're proposing for the 90-day, you just add some days on the front in December. So this closes, January 15th is the last day of the framework here. So our suggested change would make the 70-day season and the 90-day season very similar, except these days in December, and then I guess there's a few differences in the first two segments.
What the recommendation is, 70 or 90?
It's 90 this year. This doves, kind of like cranes, the numbers of doves are pretty high, and so we will be in. This is a restrictive season, so the standard season. I'm going to go back up a page. The regular season of 90 days is what we expect to be in nearly all the time.
Since Mr. Griggs isn't here, I'm going to ask if, when will you know what dove fields we're going to be planting?
Goodness, that'll be late. Well, we know the W. May fields.
He's very adamant about his dove fields in West Tennessee, so I just kind of laughed when I thought about that.
Right. We'll get that. That's been on our radar for a couple of years now, trying to get those fields, the contracts on the lease field signed up as quick as we can and get them. Tracy and the legal staff have worked extra hard last year with us with some different processes we've had with some changes downtown. And so we were anxious about getting those up, getting them on the web. We get comments every year. You put this field up 2 days before, and some of that we can't help, but we're trying to get everything we can done as early as we can. So I'm evading the question, but it's on our radar.
I'm going to have another one for you, but I'd say his is best addressed to Tracy.
No, I really don't know. I was going to ask another one. Go ahead.
Talk about you.
I have a comment to Commissioner Bledsoe. I talked to Wade Bourne just the other day. You know who I'm talking about? And Wade he wants to be involved. He wants to make a proposal or write some things about the dove season. I sent him some information on it, but he wasn't able to make this session, so you might want to get in touch with him, whoever's talking about. He had some interesting things to say about the length of the dove season and the timing and all that, so he would have some good input. I've got his email if you need it.
I've got sort of an unrelated but unrelated question. There was a study committee, and Director Carter may know this, at the International that was studying lead or toxic shock for doves and perhaps the elimination. Do you know if that study committee's still going on, Joe, to you, or are they doing anything?
Go ahead.
There was a working committee established when the whole issues of lead came out, and several states have gone into specific things that they have regulated within their own state, California being the most restrictive. But the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies had a working group that still reports and still looks at that issue as it comes up, not only for doves, but for any kind of lead. As you well know, there was a move to ban lead in all ammunition, regardless of what species was being hunted. So the association has taken a position on that, and so far it does only apply to migratory birds. It hasn't gone forward on doves unless it's in a waterfowl area. And I don't look for that to change anytime in the near future, but it comes up every year as it is in fishing. There's a pretty big move to make sure that there's no lead involved in lead weights, lead sinkers, all those kind of things, and it's a whole array of things, even applying to what kind of plastics can be used in fishing bait. So I know that wasn't your question on all that other. I just throw that out to let you know that that's an ongoing discussion. It occurs every year, and that same working group takes up both, one on the fisheries side and one on the hunting side. But I don't see that doves are going to change anytime in the near future.
I can add a little bit to that if you'd like. Just from the Flyway Council perspective, both the Atlantic and Mississippi Flyway Council were involved, obviously, in those studies that were being done. And the Flyway's perspective is that if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is ultimately responsible for all migratory game birds, including doves and other game species, if they feel this is significant, then we're ready to stand behind them and take care of some of the details if they make that decision. You'll recall what happened with waterfowl in the early 90s when the Fed said we were going to start shooting steel shot. The industry wasn't ready for that, and the performance of steel shot, the powders that were available, the ballistics were fairly bad, and there was an industry sort of pushback. There was hunter pushback. There was a lot of things that sort of were done wrong, if you will, either not really intentionally, but just sort of because of the industry, the supply, the availability of these things, and the cost. And so the Flyways, again, are willing to move on that at the technical level, but we feel like the feds are the ones to sort of make that call. Again, there are states that on public lands, I think Kansas maybe, if you hunt pheasants, you've got to have steel shot. There's a lot of folks that are more conservative, but at the national level, I think we're ready to work on that if the feds sort of draw the line.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not promoting that. I didn't know because I was on the email list when I attended that several years ago, and I commented back after about the 10th email about, or asked a question, why Argentina had so many doves, and they arguably shoot 10 times the lead that we do, and I got
10,000 times.
what? Yeah, and they took my name off the email list after that, so couldn't answer the question.
If I could make one kind of associated comment, when we first were going in on waterfowl and taking samples and gizzard samples, in one of our areas, there was a towboat tied up next to the area where we did. It was very hot that day, and they asked them if they could store the gizzard samples on board the boat. They did. When they came back to get them, they'd fried and eaten them all. So. Story.
Moving along.
Okay, moving along. So here's kind of a wrap-up of Migratory Bird Proclamation. So we've just gone through the 3 proclamations that we've had historically in Tennessee, the dove, the early season, and late seasons. In April, next month, we'll bring forward to you folks 2 proclamations. And so the current proclamation, sort of this early season one, is woodcock, snipe, crow, and September waterfowl hunting seasons. That's the name of the proclamation. We're suggesting that we move rails, moorhens, and gallinules into there because the seasons occur earlier now, and then we're going to add doves into that. So I worked with legal to maybe change that name and shorten it a little bit to say webless migratory game birds, and Lisa said, well, what's a webless migratory game bird? So she said, I guess a lot of folks go onto the website and look for these proclamations. So having a very long, it's kind of a tedious thing, but having the species in there helps the public when they go look for that. The second proclamation used to be called the Migratory Bird Hunting Seasons and Regulations, kind of a nondescript title there. So we're proposing to call it the duck, goose, and crane hunting seasons. And so we'll bring both of those proclamations to you for your approval at the next meeting. So we have just got finalized yesterday, the Sandhill Crane drawing for this year will be Saturday, August 13th, again in Birchwood at the Community Center. We're appreciative of their help. They've been great partners on this, and they enjoy having us there. I guess the number of permits is still kind of up in the air. And then if we have leftovers, we issue them at the regional offices the following Wednesday after that drawing. So that's a little preview of that.